Before the early 1800s, everyday items used to be made by skilled craftspeople. In those days, people accepted that making anything was a time-consuming process, and there was no expectation that similar products would always turn out identical either. But as the 1900s approached, new machines and industrial processes were introduced. Traditional handmade products started to be replaced by less expensive, easier-to-make versions. Consumers adapted quickly and welcomed these changes. After all, mass production made things cheaper. But there was a downside.
What happens in a mass production system is that the craftsmanship is actually transferred from the people who are physically assembling the product back up the chain away from the mass of workers who are actually doing the assembly. And the labor historians actually have a word for it. They call it de-skilling. It says we're going to take the skill away from the majority of people and we're going to invest it in a smaller group of people.
One of the first people to use mass production methods was Henry Ford, who created the first assembly line and used it to build cars. Each person put together just one part of the final product. There were no skilled workers in his factories. Instead, they were filled with unskilled laborers. De-skilling his factories in this way was bad news for craftspeople, because their skills were no longer necessary.
They said, instead of having one guy at a bench make a whole transmission, what if we have several guys at a bench and each one does a little thing on the transmission and then shoves it down the bench to the next guy?
This idea was a huge step forward for the car industry because it meant that factories like Ford's were capable of producing cars in much less time than it used to take.
When the first ones were built, which were built conventionally, it took 12.5 man-hours to make a single car. By the time mass production was fully implemented, it took 93 minutes.
Even today, some car parts are still produced on an assembly line. Although Ford's production methods were efficient, he made one crucial mistake. Mass-produced things were all alike. Consumers were saving money, but getting fewer choices, and Ford underestimated the public's demand for options, which they used to have when everything was made by hand. His competitors quickly recognized the desire for choices and began to sell cars with a variety of features. Since then, car design has become more and more innovative.
Suddenly, at that point is when design was born, because we had answered the functional attributes of moving the customer from point A to point B, and now we were offering the customer a choice of how to go from point A to point B. And then you could make the car more attractive through colors, through different materials, and then eventually through different shapes.
Although progress is usually a good thing for consumers, we shouldn't forget the importance of design and the value of craftsmanship.